In this age of gender confusion, it's difficult to find advice you can trust to help protect your child from those who would seek to unduly influence them, setting them up to be manipulated and exploited. On Unmasking the Trans Movement, we discuss, educate, and deliver the info parents want and need to help their children, grandchildren, and even themselves.
Welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement. Now, here's your host, Brad Wilder.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement on this Sunday evening. We're running just a couple of minutes behind. Technical difficulties always happen when we go live, and that's just the way live broadcasts seem to work. Welcome to tonight's broadcast. We have a great guest with us tonight who is back, more of a co-host on the program than a guest. She's been MIA, missing in action, because there's been a lot of action, and she's been a big part of creating a lot of the action that's been going on out east, and from Ottawa to Toronto to Montreal. This wonderful guest tonight has been all across several provinces, and even out west here, all the way to Vancouver and Vancouver Island and back. She is somebody who is very special to both John and I, and Dr. Ann Gillies is here, and she will get a lot of great questions covered and answers that help a lot of our guests and our viewers along the way. We've got a lot to get to. John is here as well. We'll get to our show right after this quick message.
Join Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler as he hosts a free live Q&A every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. We connect you with the clinical professionals and special broadcast guests who provide understanding on the many topics that make up this disturbing ideology and answer any questions you may have.
This week's special guest is Dan Kleiman with the World Library Association.
Protecting the most vulnerable, women and children. Unmasking the Trans Movement. For more info, please go to our website at unmaskingthetransmovement.com.
Okay, well, welcome to the program. John, great to have you back here. And Dr. Ann Gillies coming back on the program after a hiatus, which is great to have you and grateful to have you back. It's been a while. You've been busy. We're going to get to some of the things that you've been doing in just a minute. John, such a wonderful co-host as always. What are we going to discuss tonight? Because I know that this next hour is going to be incredibly informative. And as always, we welcome everybody in, and they get the chance to come on board and ask some questions in our chat room. We get to take a look at a lot of different topics on the show. And with Dr. Ann Gillies here tonight, she's going to have some very informative answers that are going to, I guess, give us a perspective that is not only clinical but also medical, and that helps along the way too. John?
Brad, I couldn't be more pleased to welcome back our co-host, actually. She has been flying all over the world, quite frankly. She is our resident expert. She has a PhD, and she's a therapist, now retired, but once a therapist, always a therapist. That's part of our challenge. But she's written a number of books. We're going to be reviewing those, but this is a wonderful opportunity for parents, for all good people, for pastors, faith-based organization leaders, anyone to really get good information, ask questions about the trans movement, all things trans movement, because it's really, trans is not real. It's unfortunately been a term manufactured, and now 20 years it's really set in. So, Ann, welcome back. You've been all over the place, and you're even working on a new book. Why don't you share with the audience? I have 3 of your books with me. As a matter of fact, I'll just do that right now. They are available. I'll show the books, and you can tell them where to get that. One of the most recent ones, or actually the most recent one, that's an excellent book. It's a beautiful book, very brief. And so what's nice, as a matter of fact, let me show you some of the pictures. So this is a book that Ann has put together, and it's talking about I mean, it's so well written for younger audiences as well as, let me give you another picture here. For those that want to, like grandparents, that want to help kids understand what is this transition stuff all about. So this, every church should have this available for their parishioners, for their members.
I agree,
This is
John. I agree with that.
Oh yeah, no, listen, I'm going to promote, right? Okay, damaged by the predators among us, and this was your own story, and I was heartened and honored. I got a couple of my little chart, or you have a couple of my little charts, and they're
I
about
was,
predators. But you talk about what it was like not only being raised in an abusive home, but then you ended up marrying a man who you thought was noble, you thought was upright, and turned out to be a predator within your own home who had access to your kids. So it's heartbreaking, but a very important warning. So we're going to ask a couple of questions about that tonight, just as far as safeguarding. And then your first book was Closing the Floodgates. Um, uh, they're wide open. And so we're going to talk about that. We've got some, or I have some questions for you, but it has a lot to do with what are the contributing factors that suddenly opened up this massive floodgate, there we are, um, into the culture, massive culture war. So you are a published author and you are our resident expert. You've been flying all over. Give us a brief update on what you've been doing.
well, there's so much. There's a couple of more books. So I have this one too. This is a short read called Implosion When the Pendulum Swings Too Far. Very short read, but just kind of what's happening in the culture right now. And when you were talking about Emily, my pastor read it and he's read all my books. And he said, I thought I knew the trans stuff. I thought I got it. I read that stuff they write, and he read that my children's book, and he said this was so good. And what he said was just what you said. This should be in every church. This should be every pastor and every parent should read it. It's easy to read, right? And it's really kind of for children to read, for parents to read to children too. So, and it's a reality. It is based on real stories. And so, what really happens to young children deciding to socially transition and then going further. So yeah, I've been busy. So this was my last one, though. This one is The Ultimate Deception.
I'm waiting for my signed copy, by the way, but I won't.
Oh,
I won't guilt trip you.
thank you. I'm sorry.
Most of us in the dust. No, I'm totally
I
kidding.
will do that. I'll send one to
That's
Betty.
funny. That's funny.
The
No,
Truth of Gender Affirmation. And so that was published in September last year, but and it's quite short as well, but it's really for parents and grandparents on understanding the science, the research I try to make it readable and so that they really understand the truth out there. And then this past week, I'm going to get this in really quickly. There was a declaration provided. It was by Protect Our Children, and it was a declaration of doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists that actually posted and did a news, what do you call it? Brad knows this, press release, and on this issue. And there were 500 signatories at that point. It was in the U.S., but it's also other professionals. John, you should be on there and signing that declaration as a professional therapist, because this is all about revocating the transgender, the affirmation therapy, all of those things. We need to revoke that. We need to turn that around. And so these professionals are starting to rise up. Now, there's been a lot of them that have been behind the scenes for the last number of years working hard. And Dr. Andre Van Mol, we've had him on before. He certainly was front and center of that declaration as well. So there's a lot of good stuff happening. What we see is more in Europe and other parts of the world as far as the UK turning things around. They just did another emergency document because there was a loophole in what they had done to prevent gender affirmation care. So that's social transitioning, that is puberty blockers and hormones and surgeries. They had banned them, and somehow there was some loophole, in legalities. And so they did an emergency ban for the next 3 months so they can get that all put together. They are really adamant in keeping minors away from transitioning, socially transitioning, and the whole gamut. So this is very encouraging news. Canada and of course our southern neighbors like you, John, are behind the 8 ball. We just, I'm telling you, it's just being
Money,
forced
big
down our
money,
throat.
right? Big money to be made off the
Oh, yeah.
carcass.
So there you go. There's the first 10 minutes of our conversation gone already.
Well, and you have given of yourself. You could have retired. I guess I could have. We all could,
We all could look at
right?
it.
But you have a heart for kids.
I do.
And let's talk about first. I first have a question. To what extent do you think trauma enters into this whole movement, where you have the pushers? It only takes one pusher to spin a narrative, and so you have really a very few pushers. They're well coordinated, well funded, yet they're targeting these kids. Speak to the issue of trauma, how that plays into kids' susceptibility to being manipulated, and especially then into and onto the moving sidewalk of the trans movement that dumps them out onto a surgeon's gurney.
Oh, that's a loaded question, isn't it?
Thanks.
It's
Well,
rhetorical too, because as you know, John, trauma is so significant and it has so many repercussions in our lives. And how we live that out, I mean, that's very individualistic, how we respond to trauma. But when we think of trauma, and when I think specific kinds of trauma, particularly sexual abuse, but parental neglect and insecure attachment, those kind of things that usually are trauma-based in themselves, they make children vulnerable to predators. There's just no ands, ifs, or buts about it. And it's not just trauma, right? It's children who have any kind of vulnerability. So whether it be autism is huge in this whole realm of gender ideology and gender dysphoria, in capturing these kids. And like you said, putting them on this conveyor belt. They are socially just so desperate for relationships. They want friendships because often they are not, they're kind of somewhat outcast by their peers. And so they will gravitate toward anyone who will show them some attention. And that's just what predators are looking for. And John,
Can you speak to
doesn't
just
even
for
have
a
to be
moment?
predators anymore, just peers.
There we go.
And I'm doing I've just finished a paper on peer attachment and the damage to children. I want to give you a stat. So this is going to throw your program into high gear, but it may throw you off track as well. This kept me up the other night because I've been looking at education, right, and our public education, and how it is actually grooming children into sexual behaviors, and we're seeing that expressed in the bathrooms of our schools, out on the playgrounds, in school buses. It's just incredible what's happening because of all the sex education and this whole proclivity toward anything goes and it doesn't matter. So I've been looking into that, but then what happened, I was doing some research into children and schools, and then started into the daycare stuff. And you know what? Things I never thought about, I began to read. And so here's something that just triggered me, because what I read was in a Quebec study. Was 2000 and I don't know where it is. I have to look. But anyways, it was in the 2000s, maybe 2008, a Quebec study in Quebec. And they found that the cortisol, not limit, but oh my goodness, I'm late at night, I can't think. Anyways, cortisol is like a stress hormone. And so what they found is that children in daycare, for about 5 hours a day, they studied these kids, and their cortisol spiked. and it was at the same levels as the Romanian orphans. I went, what? But then they were talking, the study talked about it. These children are gotten out of their bed at 6 a.m. or 6:30 or 7. They're babies, right? This is daycare. So this is from, infancy on to age 5. And they are taken to a new place. All these children, so government daycare is 25 kids. How many adults are there? Maybe 6 to 8. And maybe I'm wrong there. I don't know. But these kids, and think about 25 screaming children, crying babies all day long. Now, it's hard enough on the staff. Think about the children. Think about them themselves. If you were in an office and people were screaming and yelling all day long, what would that do to your stress level? And these are babies used to being home with mom. Anyways, so I've been doing some reading. I'm going to do more on it. This is really scary, but I am just so committed to warning parents, keep your kids home with you. Moms, stay home till your children are in school. I mean, I know that it's hard, and it's hard for everyone, but the end result is we are traumatizing. You're talking about traumatizing? We're traumatizing these little kids every single day. That's in a good daycare where there's no other things going on like sexual abuse or physical abuse or those kind of things. Anyways, that's not where we're going this time, but we're making our children vulnerable.
There we go. Right. And what you just said is not to put guilt on. If there's a single mom and she has no choice, right? We're not here to put any more guilt on than she already has. But if in any way, shape, or form, right, if you can do something different with your child, make different arrangements, because it is sort of a form of, neglect, right? The kids will feel the different effects of that, just as you said, like a Romanian orphan.
Can you imagine? Well, when we talk about attachment and parental attachment, and it is so paramount for children to securely attach to their parent, and that's certainly not what we've been seeing. Children attached to all kinds of other authority figures, and they become the parent and guiding this child. And those authority figures include, peers that are just a year or two older. And so these children are taking instruction from their peers, and sexual instruction, right? We have a mess. And it's not about guilting parents. I did the same thing. I put my kids in daycare. Who knew? It wasn't huge, like high number daycare, but even then, the good thing now, if parents are able to work at home, as difficult as it is, and figure things out with other parents, there's got to be ways to help our children not become vulnerable. Because what I see at the end of this tunnel is that we are creating these vulnerabilities in children. Mental stress in children is horrific. It's off the charts. And when I read this about the cortisol, I just thought, well, it makes sense to me. Like children, their behaviors start to change in daycare. It talks about the behavioral changes in this study, and it's anyways, that's not where we're going today. So.
But it's important, right? It factors in. I want to mention there was for those leaving comments, I want to remind people the goal is to keep it pertinent, keep it on track. But if somebody ends up being a distractor or a detractor, we'll have to show them the door. So, and anyways, because we've got a great opportunity here with you, Dr. Gillies, to continue to move things forward. If anybody does have a question, you can submit those so I'm looking over at the comments there. You can submit those in the Q&A here. Dr. Ann, I want to stick a little bit more, let's say, about the vulnerability of the teenagers. You mentioned about autism. And there is an inordinate rate of autism on the autism spectrum for those who happen to be captured by, let's see, we want to do this, captured by the trans movement. What is it about kids that are on the autism spectrum, do you think, as a therapist? Well, your background in trauma therapy as well, but as a therapist, why do they make such an easy target? Why are there so many kids within that movement that are on the autism spectrum?
Well, you make a really valid point. One of the last studies that I read, it was last summer actually, on autistic children and the whole um, vulnerability of the autistic children. What the study said that there are almost 100% of the gender dysphoric children are on the autism spectrum at some level, and they will either be diagnosed or they already are diagnosed. So that's when you think of that, okay, we have gender dysphoria and we have autism, and the two are so linked arm in arm. And I think the reality is because children who are struggling with autistic issues are socially vulnerable. They find it hard to really connect to children their own age, and they are easily manipulated. They want to please, they really want to please their peers and others, and so they're easily guided into gay-straight alliances, for instance, and then easily kind of manipulated. I think that's why we see so many. I think also with autistic children, there's a lot of trauma and abuse, even not so much even talking about their home life, but within their education system with their peers when they're young, and they're treated differently by teachers often. So you have a whole gamut of vulnerabilities with these children. And then they're very suggestible. So when the teacher looks at them and they're playing with a toy that would be equated with the opposite sex, teachers label these children. They're teachers that are diagnosing children. Ridiculous. Children are diagnosing children. And excuse me, then the doctors go and say, well, if that's what you think, there you go. And so the whole thing is just so convoluted and so evil. So yeah, it's very difficult for these children.
Well, let's say hi to some folks. Brad, do you want to tell us who's visiting?
Well, I can only see who's commented. We've got definitely some people
I
online
think your
watching.
volume's off there.
Oh, there we go. That's just for you.
Yeah.
It was on the show though, but yeah, okay, I got you. So we've got lots of people that are viewing tonight. Pretty Weird Duck is here. Danny L is here. Tim and Miranda are here, as well as Estella's here tonight. Pretty Weird Duck says some people have said that that they're on the autism spectrum, but their behaviors seem mild. How can you prove they're faking autism or even Asperger's? Is one of the questions. That's a pretty good question.
Wow.
Dan, you want to field that?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to even answer that. That sounds. How do you tell someone's faking autism? I've never seen that, so I don't know. I'm not sure.
That's a good question. I might just throw in a little bit. Someone who's genuinely autistic won't engage in debate, antagonistic debate. So if somebody feigns, one thing about autism is they have a difficult time with their intuition. So we might say in common vernacular, well, they're just kind of awkward. They don't get it. So they don't get nuances. So they're not going to, for instance, they're not going to come onto a live stream. They're not going to begin to engage somebody pretending to be simple or naive. Now, simple does not mean lacking in IQ, because think about those that are within the tech industry. We used to call them, right? We used to call them tech geeks or, internet nerds, right? But now we say they're on the autism spectrum. So you can be highly intelligent, but if you have difficulty accessing or understanding your intuition, you're more concrete. And so you're not going to be antagonistic. You're just going to be kind of straightforward. You don't even understand why somebody would not be straightforward. And so one way to tell is if somebody comes across, especially online or even like in this setting on the little super chat thing, if they come across, ask a question, you answer it, all of a sudden they come back with another one. And it's now we got a little different flavor as far as combativeness. you're likely not dealing with somebody on the autism spectrum.
That's a very good answer, John. That was better than I would have done. Yeah.
Well, hopefully that helps Pretty Weird Duck, who had the question to begin with.
So, Pretty Weird Duck, that would probably be the answer. That's what you want to look for. Somebody who genuinely is on the autism spectrum, if they get agitated, they're not going to get calculating. They will tend to escalate.
Yes.
But you'll know exactly what they're thinking because they will say it. But if somebody becomes more and more adept at debate and trying to skirt around, that's not an autistic individual. That's somebody that's portraying that they are. That's impression management, and we could even be dealing with someone who might even be a sophisticated white-collar psychopath, because they will, of course, don the cloak of anything, including they will wear women's underwear and blue dresses or any kind of dress to gain access to the spaces that vulnerable women and minors will use to congregate. So again, someone who's an adept manipulator, perpetrator, sociopath, psychopath, they have no problem coming across as anything. Whatever's going to help them. And that reminds me then of another question. In your book, dealing with the damage by the predators among us, I'm going to hold it up. I want to strongly recommend our readers get a copy of that. That's your own personal story. So you unfortunately were impacted as a child by a predator, but then you ended up marrying one. Oftentimes, those of us that want to give people the benefit of the doubt, and that's what a perpetrator or predator looks for, right? They look for people that are nice. Now, I'm not right? Gullible, right? I'm not recommending we be mean and nasty, but that's what they're going to find. Somebody they can offload their knapsacks onto. So little by little, that's what we call gaslighting. They're just little by little, they're flipping the script. They're beginning to make the other person not see what they're seeing. So they work on somebody else's intuition. So what would you say to parents, but let's say also a single mom, about some of the red flags, and also pastors? How many predators go to church? Predators love going to church. The consummate predator, kind of different form, was Judas. Okay, so he was the church treasurer, so to speak. So predators love going to church. If anybody doubts that, read 2 Peter chapter 2. It's all about predators in the church. And we're called to be discerning, but where do predators go? Where the nice people are who want to believe, want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Those are churches. So churches are a magnet, unfortunately, for predators. So talk to parents, but especially like the single moms out there, because predators will actually groom the parent to gain access to the kids.
That's right. They'll do things to get close to the child, and they'll even try and get close to you to get close to your child, right? If that's possible. So, but they like to get the child, alone, to isolate the child, to sometimes they will buy gifts for the child, to make it look, like this, they're really important, but really trying to win the child over. It depends on the age, of course. But if they can get the child through you, that's really, really kind of an easy way. The other thing, though, that we need to be careful of in the church is who we put in positions working with children. And, one of the things that's improved over the last 20 years is churches in Canada have a Plan to Protect. They have to teach Plan to Protect, and that is a very important teaching for anyone who wants to help in the Sunday schools, in VBS, and wants to work in the youth group with children. They have to have their police check, which is good. So there's some things being worked at within the church. That doesn't mean, though, that children don't need to be watched all the time. And a recent case happened, and I can't go into any details, but even in a church, parents have to take care of their own children. You can't expect other people to be watching your children. Now, I'm not trying to put anything more on parents, but know where your children are, know who they're with, because some of the red flags are that if a man, particularly, it's usually men, but more and more women are becoming predatory. If they are spending time with your child, if they're wanting to spend more time, or you see them with the child, walking down the hall, talking to them, and you're thinking, well, that's kind of strange. Don't give it a second thought. Get in there and get your child, because it is strange. Men typically do not think to be spending time in a Sunday school classroom with your child, unless they're part of a group that's teaching or something. So you have to be careful. Watch for these people. I think with the grooming part that we talked about, and you do such a good job of this, because they want to expose the child, if they can, to pornographic things. And what you have to watch now, and it's not just the adults, is the teens and the younger children from, I would say, age 11 up, that are viewing porn on their cell phones. It's probably younger than that. And we know that porn seen by young children can be very traumatizing. The kind of porn that's on the cell phones is so violent, so explicit and so violent. So protecting your child from all kinds of predatory kind of things that you wouldn't expect to have to do in the past. So there used to be all the red flags of grooming, but some of those have just expanded into watch everyone, and watch who your child is with. That sounds like you're hyper vigilant. Yeah, you have to be. If your child, so you were talking in the church. I mean, I'm trying to think of scenarios within the church, but bathroom scenarios. Listen to your child. What are they telling you that they're seeing and hearing? As far as who's following them, who's with them in the bathroom, even if it's other girls now, because we know that sex trafficking is happening by older girls actually trying to
expand upon that. Help people understand, what is sex trafficking, and what do you mean it would be by a girl in church with another girl? Describe what happens.
Well, what happens is that girls are coercing younger girls. So teen girls are now, who have been caught up in this whole sex trafficking, they have been groomed. They have become sexually active because someone has targeted them, exposed them to some kind of sexual activity, often has through the school system, but then it's in churches too. So they are trying to use, so predators, male predators, older adult males, are using teen girls or young adolescent women to encourage younger girls into the whole sex trade, and just basically exposing them to pornography, exposing them to sexual advances, and getting them the same way groomers used to in the past, enticing them, let's go to the movies together. And as a mom, you don't have to be a single mom, you see an older girl taking interest in your child, and they seem to be developing a friendship, same kind of grooming technique, develop the friendship, do things with this child, and it all looks good. But be careful, because there is an epidemic of this kind of sex trafficking in our schools, and it's also now happening within our churches.
Would we call that a reframing of pedophilia?
Yeah, it's pretty scary out there, and I feel like I'm just terrorizing parents. But the reality is, here's the other reality. Most sexual abuse, predatory behavior actually happens in the home. The vast amount, right? So that's with Stepfathers, particularly sometimes in my case, my children's own biological father, that happens. So incest in the home, uncles, that's still the predominant kind of sexual abuse. But sex trafficking is on the rise. It's really, it's much bigger than the drug trade. It's much more profitable. So get these kids into a place where they can be videotaped, they can in sexual activities that they don't particularly have to kidnap these children. They're just grooming them along the way, and they start very, kind of just developing the friendships, and the child then gets caught up in all of this. So there's so many different trajectories of grooming and then trafficking a child now that it's scary. It's scary for your children. So developing a really good relationship with your child is really, really important so that they can talk to you.
Trafficking technically is just getting a kid in a car and driving them somewhere. And what you said is so important, right? It's different than kidnapping a kid. That certainly happens, but that's the most radical thing that can happen. And those perpetrators know if they're caught, they're going to prison. The majority of perpetrators who traffic are actually in plain sight. A lot of them actually are in positions, literal positions that are mandated reporters. So they specifically go into fields or occupations where they can have a lot of access to kids, very strategic access. That's why as churches become less discerning, perpetrators are more than happy to take the label of pastor, of youth pastor, when in fact they're no Christian at all. They're just a wolf in sheep's clothing. And we think they are discipling our children. We think they're just really wanting to spend quality time with our kids. I think of Jimmy Hinton. He and I started Church Protect. His father, for 25 or 30 years, had been a pastor by day, but he was a heinous perpetrator. So not only was he perpetrating on his own kids and kids in the congregation, but he would offer to babysit kids. Yes. Well, he started out in sales. There you go. So there's a sociopathy. And there's different ways you can groom and then sexually abuse kids. It's important for people to understand it doesn't take a guy taking his pants down to abuse a kid. They can abuse them with their hands, with their fingers, right in front of people. This will shock people, but this is fact. So while this pastor Hinton was baptizing kids, including his own daughter, he was digitally fondling and raping the kid while dunking her underwater.
That just seems so atrocious.
Right. And if people say, well, don't tell me about that. Okay. That's all a perpetrator needs. We sometimes need to have our senses shocked. So we open our eyes to the reality that these are not nice people. And the more they can play us for fools, the more they will. So whatever they have to do. And the classic thing right now are guys that are dressing in women's underwear and drag because it's such a shock to the system. As a matter of fact, most people don't realize we actually think perpetrators have a line beyond which they wouldn't go or wouldn't cross. And it's almost like we're thinking, well, yeah, he may be kind of sexually deviant, but nobody would stoop so low as to, yeah. And
What?
so they would dress in drag to get on a girls or get on a female sports team. Why? Because then they get to go in the locker room, in the change room with their cell phone cameras, or they then, once busted, guess what they get to do? They can self-ID and off into a female prison they go. It all ties in. You have sexually deviant men that are pushing boundaries so they can have access to kids. And then you have people that are coming along, especially male sexologists, unfortunately, coming along and reframing this. And this may be a perfect time for me to ask, in your book, which one, the Closing the Floodgates, you reference maps. Okay,
Yeah.
This is a big thing, even in, I hate to say it, sex offender treatment assessments or training sex offender treatment professionals. I have a huge concern that there is a movement, and it's not a subtle one now.
Oh,
Okay, the nation, at least in the US, the nation's largest association for sex offender treatment professionals, where they go to get training. A keynote speaker a year ago or 2 years ago now was a guy from Old Dominion who was pushing the reframing of pedophilia.
there you go.
Okay, so that means sex offender treatment specialists who can fulfill the role of evaluating. So a perp gets busted, he gets put in jail, he's county jail, and he's awaiting to go before a judge. And they're going to make a plea deal and all that. Well, one part and parcel of that is he's going to have a risk assessment. The question is, who's doing that assessment that the judge takes, that the judge receives in order to look at, okay, am I going to have this go to trial, or are we just going to put him out on parole? So he's going to be diverted from jail time. Well, the judge oftentimes relies upon the risk assessment.
Right.
So who's doing the risk assessment? If you are training those professionals to dumb down their senses, to reframe pedophilia, what's right in front of them, then they're going to score as low risk. And I've actually seen this now a number of times, also in the institutions. We wonder how guys get out. Prior to maxing their sentence out, somebody has to let them out. And I'll tell you, it comes down to a sex offender treatment individual who, or a psych eval, who has written an assessment. The parole board looks at that and it says, well, the psych specialist says he's not a risk. The prison administration just wants to, heads on beds. They got to get him out. And so the dirty little secret within the prison system is you have psych individuals, psych staff, that either don't understand or don't care about level of risk. And now they're coming back into the community and reoffending. And so a big part of that has been the reframing of pedophilia. Now they're called minor attracted persons or minor attraction.
John, some of these individuals that are in prison actually are men, and the men that you're talking about, and they're attacking female inmates until they get them pregnant. Those men have made their own kids and have access to those kids once they're released out. Is that fair to say? Pretty Weird Duck made that comment, and it seems like it's right on track.
Right? That's interesting, right? What happens if a perp, and by the way, 100% of these guys that want to be sent into female prisons, 100% are dangerous to women. How do I know? I was 11 years on psych staff in prison. So the true trans, there's no such thing as trans, but those that will maintain that outer disposition, so to speak, they love being in the male prison. Why? They get special treatment, special protection. They get to ogle the guys, the whole thing, right? So the safest place for, quote unquote, a trans inmate, a male guy, right, is to be in a male prison. And everybody knows it. They get their single cell. That's a premium. So any guy, therefore, that wants to go into a female prison is a danger, and he's going to prey upon them. And so that's an excellent question, right? I hadn't even thought about that. So let's say a guy rapes his cellmate. Can you imagine? You're a female, and here comes your new cellie, 6'2", and
Right.
they shut the door.
With parts intact.
There you go.
Craziness.
Men get raped in prison. What do you think he's going to do? And so now, excellent question. I actually hadn't thought about that. So now we got a guy that rapes, right? And talk about there are no secrets in prison, but you open your mouth, guess what he's going to do to her? And so now she has to keep quiet. She gets pregnant, and I don't doubt these guys, right? They can claim that's my child. And now do they get parental rights?
Probably.
It's
right?
unbelievable.
Well, and I do think that's happened. I think I've read a couple cases where women have gotten pregnant from trans men, like trans women, whatever you want to call them. They're men. And, this is unconscionable. Unconscionable that we would do this to women. I mean, they're vulnerable. And here we are doing all that. But you want to go back to MAPS. Because this is the whole thing, what they are pushing, what the psychological associations now, and not all of the associations or all the people within them, but the academic world is actually teaching about intergenerational intimacy and how
Like
good
that. Repeat that again, and let everybody needs to let this sink in.
intergenerational intimacy.
There you go.
And I want to say, and I talk about this in Closing the Floodgates, this is not new. Kinsey was an advocate of this, of incest. His associate Pomeroy, he was all about incest.
These are all DSM guys, right?
What's that?
These are all the DSM guys that you're talking about, Kinsey?
Yeah, well, no, he's actually, he was the 1948 study on sexuality.
The father of the
DSM,
sexual revolution.
Yes,
oh, okay.
He was. But Pomeroy was, I think Pomeroy's dead now. I'm not sure.
Imagine, yeah.
But he was one of Kinsey's students, became a psychologist. So he's a psychologist, right? And I mean, these men are saying things. The only unnatural sex that you can have is that which you can't do. Like anything else is fair game, including sex with children. So when you talk about intergenerational intimacy now, this has been building in academia for 70 years. And now we're seeing the fruition of that. And young minds that are going into university after years of radical sex education in the public school system, they get into university and their minds are just already, they're very hypersexual in the sense that they've learned that everyone has sexual rights. And of course, according to Kinsey way back in 1948, that children are sexual beings from birth onward. That was Kinsey.
Repeat that phrase, because that now has become so embedded in the psyche of the culture that people think it's true.
Oh yeah, like that babies are sexual. And what he's talking, when he says sexual beings, people get confused. Well, yeah, I guess they have a sex, they're male or female. What he's talking about is they are sexual, that they can be primed for sexual activity from infancy onward. And that's for 70 years we've been hearing this, in academia. And now they're just embracing it. So intergenerational intimacy, that's MAPS, minor attracted persons. These are minors, so young men who are attracted to children. And one of the things that
the older adults, anybody that wants, is going to go after a child, they can say, well, I'm minor attracted.
Yeah, yes, you're right. They're minor attracted, but what they're doing is the academics are playing on our emotions, because they're saying these young men, it's like a coming out for them, because they realize, in their early teens that they're attracted to children. And so, we want to help these young men so that they will not actually violate a child. And so we want them to talk in groups about being attracted to children. And so you have groups of young men, 16, 17-year-olds now coming together saying that they're attracted to children. And you put a bunch of young men in a group situation to talk about sexual attraction to children, what is that going to do? That is just fueling the fire. But you're right, minor people that are attracted to children are pedophiles.
And that's right. And they they're toying with the language. We had Alvin Louis on a couple of weeks ago, and he talks about they will use the toy with language. So instead of talking about this is lust filled, there's no attraction about this. Nobody's attracted to a child's body. These are men that are deviant. It's been fueled. The deviance has been fueled by being saturated with pornography. So the issue is deviance. Everybody needs to understand that you can become deviant. So long before porn, men were deviant. What is deviance? It's the opposite of love. It's the opposite of normal sexuality. Normal sexuality has to do with actual attraction, heart-to-heart connection. So a man requires the mood to get an erection, to maintain an erection. If the mood is ruined, or the woman says, I'm not in the mood, a normal guy will not pursue or follow through. He will stop. But the more selfish he becomes,
That's
the
right.
less he cares about the woman and the or his partner, and the less he cares about her satisfaction. It's all about him. We all understand that. Sadly, welcome to the world out there. But if a guy continues eventually and he allows his lust to take hold, he will morph through certain stages. And in this day and age, you cannot tell me any guy who is morphing through various stages, becoming more and more self centered, isn't accessing pornography. It's
They start there.
100% the case, right? So, what deviance is, and this is what everybody needs to understand, this is a key. Deviance means that a guy has become so inverted that he can only get an erection to the extent that he knows that the partner he has in front of him, the object he has, the person he has in front of them, is experiencing distress. That's really important. A normal man cannot get an erection if he knows that his partner is not enjoying herself, let alone in distress. So every man that rapes someone is a deviant. Every man that rapes someone is a predator. And that's why, for instance, in Pennsylvania, the Sex Offender Assessment Board, the SOAB board, is a secondary board. They would also assess sexually violent predators in addition to the psych staff with the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. Their standard assessment instrument is the hair psychopathy checklist, the PCLR. Why? It is understood that if a man crosses sexual boundaries, he's already deviant. Now we need to know to what extent. And therefore, the issue is deviance, but in this day and age, pornography will always 100% of the time be involved. So you are changing a guy into a predator, yet when he's busted, you notice none of these guys turn themselves in, so they are not sorry, and they don't care about the impact. And the definition of a psychopath, by the way, is no conscience, no remorse, no empathy. You lay your sexuality on that, and you have a guy that he's going to cross boundaries. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about the outcome. And he will lie through his teeth. Why? In order to be diverted from prison or get out as soon as possible. So he now has the perfect ruse, which is, well, I don't know, I'm attracted. And then they'll also lie, the sophisticated ones, right? How do you know the difference between non-sophisticated versus sophisticated? The question is, were people shocked when the guy was arrested? If people were not shocked, then he's not sophisticated. And he probably doesn't have as many victims. So the guys who are sophisticated are very self-controlled, and they weren't perped on, because if you're perped on, you'll be reactive once you get into adulthood. So the sophisticated perpetrator has no problem making up a grand lie that, oh, he was abused, so hurt people, and he must be reenacting his own abuse at the same age that he himself was abused. Where do we get that? Everybody, right? In this day and age, they say, well, that's what the literature shows. Okay, where do you get the literature? From research. Who do they research? Pedophiles. Where do they get that information? There's no facts, no details, no corroborating evidence. It's the mouth of the world's greatest liars who are practicing for parole. When the researcher comes into the prison, they're sitting in front of the world's greatest liars, not realizing that the pedophile is using the researcher to reframe things out in the community so that judges begin to believe this, and they're practicing for parole. And you were on the receiving end of that kind of deception. Let's first ask, Brad, do we have, I know I got on a roll there. Do we have any additional, do we have any questions thus far? And then Ann's going to have the last word. Oh my.
Oh dear.
Well, no, questions are actually kind of just taking a back seat because you've been educating. So it's good. Educating is good. We like that. So let's just stick to the plan. We'll get Dr. Ann to kind of finish where we are, and we'll bring this home. We've got about 5 minutes to go, guys.
Well, let me just add this, that the men you're talking about they exploit and they manipulate. They are master manipulators. And they've learned that because they've had years of doing that, usually by the time they're caught. But let's go back to looking at what's happening now with our young people who are radically being exposed to pornography. And I mean, the stats are out there. Like porn is so addictive, and it tracks addiction-wise as fast as heroin in the brain. So for some people, it's just for some young men, like viewing porn once is enough to capture them and have an addictive response. Then the more porn, and John, you are the one who has written so much about this and do so well at tracking, that it becomes more and more sexually arousing, and then they have to begin to act on it. And that's what we're seeing with young men in situations where they come across children or churches, for instance, where teenage boys have access to kids. Just, they're in the kitchen or walking down the hall and nobody's watching. Like this is serious stuff. It can happen so quickly. And so these young men then, as they continue, because they will continue until they get caught. And if you can get them caught early, perhaps you can, turn it around a little bit, hopefully. But once it becomes entrenched, the porn and then the sexual arousal from porn and then acting it out. And one of the things that they're saying now is that the earlier a child begins watching porn and accessing porn, the more likely they are to become child abusers themselves, and also they're into bestiality. Those two things, by the way, go hand in hand. In research now that we're seeing that bestiality, which is interestingly enough, the LGBTQ community is actually coming out in favor of that now. We're hearing some things which we knew it was there all along, but
they're reframing it, and they're reframing it as zoophilia or zoos. So if anybody hears online, zoos, you're talking about people that are into bestiality.
Yes. Well, and I talk about, in Implosion, I talk about furries, and the whole area of people dressing up. But it's more than dressing up, because furries it becomes their persona. So we have the transgender, we have the gender mania phase going on here, right? And so then the furries are, children are furries at school, and they are saying, I am a cat. All of this is grooming. It's all grooming. And so parents just need to be very aware, keep their eyes wide open, and to be able then to understand that if we don't get some things changed and the porn industry itself shut down somehow, and there's some groups really trying hard to do that, we parents have to take some action with their children.
100%. It starts and ends right here in Canada with Pornhub, a rabbi who owns Pornhub, MindGeek, all of that. It needs to come to an end. And as we say that, we are coming to an end tonight. I want to mention that Pretty Weird Duck says, to clarify, I'm not a furry. I'm using a persona online because I thought it was fun. So, Pretty Weird Duck, I've heard some very sketchy stuff about furries, though. You may have heard some sketchy stuff about furries, but that wasn't through us. We only tell the truth here.
Well, and I think, thank you. We need to keep bringing this stuff in front of parents. And so here's the deal. Get your kids out of the public school system. Radically, this is a very radical statement. Don't give them a cell phone till they're early teens. I mean, parents are like, oh, how can you do that? Well, do you want to protect your children? You are to protect them and provide for them and love them. You are not to give them everything they want. They do not need cell phones.
Call it parental responsibility, not parental rights. It's parental responsibility, and I love that term.
You have a responsibility to protect our children, and children have a right to be protected still in Canada, and parents need to fight for that right. So, I mean, there's so much going on, and it's overwhelming for parents today. So my heart goes out to them, but I really want to make sure that they're as educated as possible as well.
quick last comment here to Tim and Miranda. What about kids that are mascots or want to be mascots? Should they be warned? Well, I got to be honest with you. I think we're not headed down that path with any of our discussion here. There's a deviant element, as you know, and
those are two different things. But if
Yeah.
you have an adult who wants to play dress up, who hides 100% of their identity, let me ask you all: do you know who's in that costume? So if you have adults that are doing cosplay, my challenge to them is why. Historical reenactment is different.
Yeah.
But if you have adults that want to play dress up, instead of using their time to productively invest in the lives of other people, the question is, at the very least, might not you be developmentally stuck? But as a parent, I'm telling you what, I first heard about furries in the prison system from pedophiles saying that's the most effective means by which they can access kids. You hide 100% of your identity, and the parents, because you're in a nice fluffy costume that looks like Disneyland, they'll hand their kids to you. That's the first time I learned about furries, and that opened my eyes. These are highly sexually deviant individuals. By their own research, 99% of the men that are involved in furries that you can't tell who's under that costume are into watching bestiality porn, persona porn.
absolutely.
Okay, so I just
But
want to say one thing.
Yeah.
What about our poor Blue Jays mascot? Like, give the guy a break.
Yeah, we're not. I'm not here to talk about mascots.
No.
sports
We're not talking
mascots
about
are a
that.
little bit of a different situation, and that's totally
100%,
different.
100%.
But let's face it, there are deviant individuals in all kinds of costumes these days, and we all need to take notice. We all need to make sure we do our due diligence. Parental responsibility is where that comes in. Be responsible not only for your kids, but the kids around your kids, and be responsible for the parents that you're playing around with as well, because that is part of this all too, because there are deviant parents out there too that are pushing all of this, and they can get into your space and they can push your kid in a direction that you don't even see it happening.
It's true.
John, last words?
I think he's frozen. He looks like he's frozen.
He does look like he's frozen solid.
Something's happened. Anyways, but I will just say thank you very much. I appreciate being on with you guys. I've missed you guys. So we will see you again, I think, next week.
We missed you too, Dr. Ann, and we look forward to having you back on the program again really soon. John has obviously ducked out because of the connection loss, and that's okay. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement. Again, thank you very much to everybody for being here. We have another show coming up next Sunday night, 9 o'clock as well, Eastern Time. Another great guest will be here next week, Dan Kleinman from the American Library Association.
Okay.
Is that the American Library Association, Dr. Ann?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's different than the U.S. Library Association, I believe, right? There's
He's been working a lot.
two different entities. Yeah, he's got his own entity that's trying to circumvent some of the stuff that's going on within our libraries across North America, for that matter. So it'll be a great program. Thanks to everybody for being here. We wish you all the best this week, and we'll see you next Sunday. Thanks a lot for being here.